down, sitting down and just feeling your muscles release and inviting you to focus. I find that ourselves as Black women, we have our minds on a lot of things ourselves, our families, our friends, the world, everything around us is constantly in motion. And it can be hard to take a breath. And so I do want to invite you to just, before we enter this space, take a few moments to just steady ourselves. And so, in whatever way you feel comfortable, for the next 30 seconds, we're just going to focus on only our breathing. And so, I'm going to just lead us in that. And so, just breathe however you feel is most natural to you. If you want to close your eyes, please feel free to do so. If you feel like you want to walk around, please feel free to do so. But just breathe and focus on your breath. It really can be hard for us to have these moments, especially when doing this work. So please feel free to take moments for yourself throughout this presentation. And also setting our intentions for this space. I would really love to hear from you all about how many of you have experienced workplace racism and how have you felt, if you have felt, supported by your coworkers while experiencing workplace racism. I myself have recently gone through a bout of workplace racism and found that confiding in safe coworkers was a way that I could feel supported through this process. And so I'd really like to set our intentions by hearing from you all. If any of you are willing to share, either in the comments or um, just speaking out. That can be a tough question. So I'll give us a few moments just to think about that. And also, if anyone has any intentions specifically for our space, if we want to go in with any sort of intentions, I like to go in with the mindset of respectful communication, thinking about how my communication may affect another person. Um, and so that is what an intention that I like to go into. And so if anyone would like to share those out as well. I see Patrice sharing, I have experienced it, and you often feel ignored in the space by others. Yes. And Dr. Quincy Bloxham, yes, experienced it, rarely supported, and wasn't understood by aspiring allies. Mhm. I feel nervous about the space that my space for workplace coworkers. I don't want to overwhelm them. Energy is transferable. I do want to touch on that. Um, One thing that I think when speaking with other coworkers about this is inviting them to hear what you have to say, making sure that they have the capacity to hear that, and always checking in about if this is too much for you to hear in this moment, if this is something you are not comfortable with, then please let me know. And we can talk about this at a different time, or maybe we don't need to talk about this at all. Um, I think that is such a good point to bring up that energy is transferable. And we do not want to damage someone else's energy by our own experience. So thank you for that. And so, what is Black advocacy? Black advocacy to me is much more than doing the work. It is a mindset, a lifestyle, a way of being. To me, it is, I have on the screen here, applied advocacy with an anti oppression mindset. And that to me means that we are out and we are doing this work, but we are also navigating all of these systems. As women of color, we can see where the systems have these faults because we have experienced them ourselves. And we have this higher level of awareness where we can see where our clients may fall through the cracks. And Black advocacy to me means that we have this higher level of awareness where we might be able to catch this before it happens, where we can fill in these gaps for our clients. We can stand alongside them and not overshadow their voice because we have had our voices overshadowed. We know how to be an ally. And one thing I do want to be clear about, at least from my perspective, not all Black advocates provide Black advocacy. And I think this comes about in many different ways, whether it be for internalized racism, whether it be that the workplace does not allow the mindset of Black advocacy to exist, um, all sorts of different methods where Black advocacy is not going to be able to thrive in that workplace culture. Black advocacy to me also is working with a trauma informed racial justice lens. And so that is where we are seeing the trauma of how racialized harm has gone throughout all of these systems. And we can assist our clients in that harm and healing from that harm, where we have that lens on at all times. And it's not only a lens, but it's just our eyes. We're just seeing that as we exist through this world. And from my perspective, all clients can benefit from Black advocacy, not just people of color. Black advocacy is one where we can help our clients fight the systemic issues that they're facing, navigate the systems they have been in, and navigate these institutional powers. Most clients who are coming to us have been in these systems for a very long time and have trouble seeing the other side of that system. And so, with this way of Black advocacy, since we have been so institutionalized and have had this trouble of fighting these systems, we have come out the other side. We can help our clients with these perspectives from a different point of view than just simply, well, you need to follow the system, you need to do what the system says. We can help them find these ways around and find ways that they are able to exist within these systems or without these systems, um, so that they are able to live lives that are meaningful to them. I'd like to go into racially biased clients. And so, two things I'd like to make clear when talking about racially biased clients is that mental illness does not cause racism, and mental illness is not an excuse for racism. I bring these points up because often when we work with those who have experienced violence, they may have mental illness issues or things that they may face, but this is not an excuse for racism. Racism is an ingrained pattern of being and an ingrained mindset. It does not mean that your client's mental illness has caused them to believe that other people are less than. Also, that clients are the product of their system and their environment. I bring this point up, and I'd like to share with you all an experience that I had um, working with a client who was very racially biased. Um, as I was beginning in my career, I worked with a client who was charged with several hate crimes, which is very rare to be charged with, as we know how often and how rare it is for people to get charged with hate crimes. Um, and so I often question why this client was paired with me specifically when there were other white advocates available for this client to be paired with. Um, and this client, their mindset of this racialized hatred towards Black advocates specifically came about from an assault from a Black man. And that is a perspective that grew from the product of their environment, not from mental illness, not from anything else. Um, and so when we take that client out of that environment and put them in a new one, that mindset and that perspective dwindled away. Um, and when we change that environment and when we allow that client to have safe Black advocates who they could feel supported by, we were able to change that client's perspective on racialized bias. Um, One thing I think that as Black advocates, we have seen, I know for myself, I definitely have had this, is that I felt like it is my job to try and fix my client's mindset, that I don't want my client to be racist. But it's not your job. It's not your job to change someone's racist ideals. It is not your responsibility. I think as advocates, we try to work to make sure that our clients come out better than they leave, but that does not mean that they have to leave as better humans. And that does not mean that they have to leave with better ideals. And so, if anyone is needing that permission to not have to change a racist client's ideals, this is it. You do not have to do that. That is not energy that you have to give. It can be hard working with racially biased clients, but that is not a mindset that you have the responsibility to reform. Uh, I'm seeing a question in the chat. What's the best way for advocating restorative practices in your workplace? So I will go ahead and answer this. I would say that transformative justice and restorative justice practices in your workplace, I meaning for clients, I would say that if we're talking about for clients, I would focus on going to your supervisor and asking them if you can have some sort of mediation with clients who you feel may have had some sort of racialized bias or harm. Um, I do talk about coming up next about this sort of mutual agreement where we find a compromise in the work with clients who have done this harm. Um, and so, advocating for restorative justice practices, I always like to fall back on the research. And that is often what I find leadership will go to is if you can find the research supporting these practices that show they're effective, it it will follow. Um, and so whether that be research articles, whether that be studies or uh, videos, just whatever it may be that shows that this was effective somewhere else, that would be the best place that I think to implement. And so then going back to some approaches for handling racially biased clients, one approach that I found is killing with kindness. Oftentimes, racially biased clients have a stereotypical approach that they have in your head of a Black advocate, a person of color advocate. And rarely ever is that stereotype going to be that you are a kind, supportive human being. And so, killing that stereotype with kindness, being incredibly kind and wonderful to this client because that is who you are and that is the advocate that you are. And just letting them know that there are people who look like you with your melanated skin that are able to do this work and support them. Um, the other one is transfer of care. I think oftentimes we feel like this is a cop out. Transferring a client to another service provider can often feel like we're not providing care for that client. But I want to reframe that because we are providing care. If you are not the best advocate for this person, then you are not the best advocate. If this advocate would be better served getting services from someone else, then that is where they need to go. And that is ensuring that you are providing quality care for this client. Um, and then the last one is mutual agreement. And I will say this is the one that I have had the most success with, being able to work with racially biased clients in the long term, um, without feeling as though I myself have been harmed. And so when a client makes a comment to me that has a sort of racialized undertone, no matter how strong or how soft, I always address it. And I make sure that I note that this is not allowed in this space, that it is a healing space. It is a space that we are moving towards making a path for their healing, and that it's not welcomed in this space while they're working with my services. Um, and after that, I haven't had any difficulties with any clients I've gone with that approach to of any more racial comments. And so those are the three approaches that I would recommend. And so we're going to move into white supremacy and supervisors. Um, as we all know, racism was built into the organization. Almost all, I should say, organizations were built, especially when we look at organizations that are social service organizations, were built by white women who are trying to do change. And that doesn't mean that these organizations are not great organizations that are powerhouses that are doing good work. But that does mean that they were built with an institutionalized racism, that their policies, their structure, their overall being has racism in it. And it will take a lot to dismantle that. Um, and so just being aware that these organizations will need that extra sort of that extra being to take down this racism. And this one is for all my supervisors out there, sort of a call to action, because when we look at these organizations, there's almost always a hierarchy chart, looking at middle management, executive level management, where supervisors have a power and privilege that lower level employees do not. And supervisors have a responsibility to combat racism. If an employee goes to you and says, I'm experiencing this racism, it should never be put back on the employee to make changes and to find a way to work within the racism. It should always be on the supervisor and the leadership to dismantle that racism and take it down and ensure that that is a safe workplace. So please take that as a call to action. I want to introduce the topic of courageous leadership. And so, courageous leadership is the idea that change can only occur when we have leaders who aren't submissive to the system. Um, and so, oftentimes, we have leaders who have been put into their supervisory positions because they've gone with the flow, they've done what they've been asked, and haven't questioned anything. And that, unfortunately, does not dismantle racism. And so, if we want to start dismantling these racist systems that we have been working in, we need leaders who will question why things have been moving the way that they have been. Why are we treating these employees this way? Why is this way? Things like that. We need courageous and curious leaders. Um, Now, I do want to also preface that courageous leadership is not for everyone because courageous leadership can have consequences. Um, and so be sure that if you are wanting to be a courageous leader, you have the ability to be safe in your position, to have a backup plan, to make those arrangements, because courageous leadership is meant to ruffle feathers and meant to wake waves. Now, moving into the racism we don't see. Oftentimes, the racism that goes on in a workplace is not these overt tactics that are large and easy for everyone to see. It's more like a little mosquito bite that just keeps biting and biting again and again over time. Um, and so I want us to be aware of these covert tactics that when we call them out enough, we can do we can make some change. And so I'll go over some of them here. The first one is pay disparity. Pay disparity. And so pay disparity, whether that be 50 cents, whether that be a dollar, $3, whether it even be 5 cents, talking with your colleagues about how much you get paid compared to how much they get paid, compared to your experience, your education, those are important conversations. And always remember, we're not taking it out on our coworkers. We're going to our supervisors and we're talking about how if we're underpaid, that needs to be rectified. Denial of promotion. Um, I have seen this before where qualified Black women have been denied a promotion because they do not want that. Well, they do not want to have a Black woman in leadership. Um, and so being aware of if you deserve a promotion, if you have been at the organization for long enough to get a promotion, if you've expressed interest, if you're feeling passed over, um, just being aware of that. And then denial of company use. This one is kind of vague, but it can be hard to look out for as well. And so that can be maybe denial of the company credit card, denial of driving the company car. Maybe you're not able to get office supplies, denial of the use of company products that are branded as your organization's things that everyone has access to, but for some reason you've been denied without an explanation. Um, and then, as well as dismissal of concerns, going to your supervisor with any concerns, not just racial concerns, but any sort of concern, and your supervisor has just dismissed them. Um, we know that this can just be due to race, not taking your problem seriously because of your skin color. Maybe you're being over dramatic. Maybe you're doing this. Maybe you're doing that because of your skin color. And then also encouragement to resign. Um, this one can be a little tricky. I've seen it sometimes like framed in a very positive way of, well, maybe you're just not meant to be here. You're not growing here. You're not learning here. So maybe it's time to look somewhere else. That is encouragement to resign, and that is racism. Um, so looking at other things like that, it might not be as flat out as, hey, I think you should resign. Um, Also going to an equal office space, looking at, um, is it as big as maybe you don't have a desk and your other colleagues do? Or is it things like if you put in a request to get a stapler, it's not approved? Um, Things such as that, where your office space and your basic needs to do your job are not being met. And then other duties. Are you being asked to do more jobs, more labor than other coworkers? And is it even outside of your job description? Are you being asked to participate in manual labor when you were hired for direct service? Are you being asked to go clean the bathrooms when you were hired to do therapy? Um, Being aware of that, because oftentimes at organizations where we do this survivor work, we fill in wherever we're needed. But keeping in mind that if not everyone is filling in, then we're not all being helpful, and it might have something to do with our race. Public humiliation. This is probably the most overt one on here, um, in that it is just as blatant as someone talking down to you, berating you in front of others. And so being aware of that, and maybe it doesn't have any sort of racial undertones in the way that the person is speaking, but berating you in public, it in and of itself is wrong. And having to then look at your other colleagues and wonder why they are not being treated this way, um, that would be something to think about. Maybe your race has something to do with it. And so now I want to hear a little bit more from you. What your workplace racism experience? Um, if anyone wants to share any, I would love to hear them about anything at all. I'm seeing one in the chat. Oh, here we have a hand raised. So, Comfort Dondo, Executive Director. If you're able to come off mute, would love to hear from you.
So much. Yeah, thank you. Greetings, everyone. I'm very thankful to be able to be here. And just, I think I wrote in the chart, to be able to kind of trace back some steps. Um, I am first generation African immigrant. And so, I think earlier in my career, I was coming from a majority black space where race or racism was not something that I was familiar with. So imagine spending about 8 years out of the 15 that I had spent in my first part of my career, not understanding what had happened, what was happening to me, what was being done to me, to a point where I started questioning myself. And then it was a very isolated space in terms of the part of the state I was in Iowa. And so I didn't have a lot of spaces like this, like with Jima, right, where I could gather with fellow sisters and just share. But I think one example that comes to mind is not way back in the beginning of my career. It is actually quite recent, where I'm the executive director of this smaller nonprofit that does serve Afro Latina, women of African heritage in Minnesota. And I had a meeting with the city council to discuss some of the properties that they owned, that we were trying to acquire, to build more drop-in centers. And I was invited to the city council meeting. Unbeknown to me, there was an executive director of one of the largest domestic violence shelter systems in Minnesota, and she's a older white woman. Um, Looking back to what you just shared now, I uh, I was not at all thinking about racism, but this is what happened. She was there uninvited by me, but invited by the city council, which is really, that city council has been known to be very, very racially biased. So I think the first thing for me that I look back at is the disrespect of inviting someone without my consent or knowledge, and she was sitting in the meeting. And what happened during the meeting after I did my presentation? We went on to ask me if we were 501(c)(3) certified, and she addressed me as if she did not know me. But I had sat on several committees with her. I had presented at conferences, state, local conferences when she was present. And after the meeting, when she asked those questions, I saw the city council members, their energy shifting,
Mhm.
almost like what was like a lack of confidence in what I had to say.
Mhm.
And after the meeting was done, her co-director, who's an indigenous sister, came to me and apologized about what had happened. And for me, I think that was the moment where I realized I wasn't just seeing that, like I wasn't just seeing things, but that
Mhm.
was real, that happened. And so I think that's a story that I'll always share, because you can't really make this stuff up. And when I wrote initially, I had shared that it's said that the kind of racism that I continue to experience in a place of leadership is a little bit more, it's hard to explain sometimes, because it is in these spaces where they claim to be progressive and they claim to be radically, whatever, open, and yet behind closed doors, a case scenario like the one I just shared here happens, and it happens a lot. And I think that's my share. And I'm sorry for taking up a lot of time, but I thought I'd share that. Thank you.
No, thank you so much for sharing. I think you bring up a very good point of thinking about that you were not aware, like you were questioning yourself. And that is one thing I just want to reiterate to you all that it may be normal to question yourself, but be confident in that what you are witnessing, what you are feeling is true, that you and your feelings are true. And if you feel that something is wrong, then go with your gut. I see that we have another hand raised, and so I think we do have enough time to, hear from someone else. And so, Samawat Bear Honey, if I pronounce that incorrectly, please correct me.
It
I would
is.
love to hear from you.
It's okay. It's Salam Awit,
Thank you.
and it's okay. And I go by Salam. And what happened to me, it was a while ago, and I worked for this organization up in DC, and I was the new staff in there, and I was like told, like, within like maybe 2 months, that I have beat everybody in the way I perform my work and all of this. But and then somebody called to complain and said that they spoke to the person who had an accent, and I was the only person there with an accent. And so one of the leaders at the organization, he was from an Asian descent. He is the one who told me. He's like, "Yeah, well, they're calling you a person with an accent, so And I was so humiliated in front of everybody and embarrassed. And from all the people, he is of an Asian descent, and he's the one person who said, um, you are a person with an accent. And I'm like, okay, I'm a person with an accent, but I do a very good job. Just like a week ago, everybody was saying that I beat everybody else. So it's like it hurt me. And that's when it's my first time to experience racism. I just was blown by it. But then thank God I just left that place.
Thank you for sharing. Um, I I'm so sorry that happened to you, and I just think about the solidarity that it's important that we share with our other brothers and sisters of color, and that they reflect back with us that when we face racism, that we get supported by them and we support them as well. Um, I am happy to share that when I experienced my workplace racism, I was able to gather support from my Hispanic and Arab sisters. Um, and so that made me feel as though I was very much understanding what was going on, and that um, I had a lot of support in moving forward with ensuring that this didn't continue happening to me, but also didn't happen to them as well. So thank you for sharing. Is there anyone else who would like to share? Right. I will go on ahead and move forward. We do have some space at the end left for us to have a conversation and a whole dialogue. And so anyone can feel free to jump in then. Um, so I just want to go over next the challenges that we face. Um, Looking at systemic power influences our ability to be productive and feel fulfilled in this work. And so, reflecting on our own personal experiences with workplace racism, and when systemic powers and influences may drain us, that that can take away our motivation to continue doing this work, to continue being able to support and being a supportive person for others uh, that we are doing this work for. Um, and it can really damage our ability to continue in the career path that we have chosen. And so being mindful of that is a big challenge that I see within workplace racism, is that can have a long lasting effect on our career in itself. Um, and So I have this little chart here talking about just all that goes in to what can create a workplace racism system, and what structurally creates a system. And so I will just briefly go over it. Uh, Implicit bias, of course, we can see that when we don't have in check our own bias, and it comes out and we're unaware of it, then that is how it all starts. And then falling into stereotypes. When we see these stereotypes and they are out and about, and we're not having anyone stopping them from falling into sort of, I'm going to rephrase that. When we do not have anyone in leadership ensuring that our coworkers, our management are not applying stereotypes to us, then they can run rampant. We also have our historical prejudice. And I think historical prejudice applies to all organizations. Um, when I was first making this slide, I was thinking of historical prejudice mostly applying to organizations that have been around for a hot minute and have done this work for a longer time. But even those organizations who have only been around for even a few years, we still see them falling into the systems that have been around for a longer time because of the way that our institutional structures are built, having to follow governmental regulations and things such as that. And so when we see organizations having to follow those guidelines and not being aware of any sort of prejudice that may come along with that, we can see that being historically implemented. Um, and also the policies. Policies, I think, are a big one for things that may come up that can cause workplace racism. Um, and I also want to intertwine policies with procedures. And so maybe the policy isn't written down and on the books as this is how we do it, but it is something of this is how it's always been, this is how we do it, this is just why it is, and no one's questioning it. Well, not questioning it and someone telling you, a Black person telling you that this is racist, that is something that needs to be taken care of. That is leading to this workplace racism. And then we see those overt and covert racist tactics that we talked about previously, uh, as well as lack of DEI training. I am a firm believer of we can never have enough of DEI training, uh, that everyone should have to go through them no matter who you are, often because there are so many intersectioning identities that it's just a space where we should be able to learn about others. And so when organizations do not follow through on ensuring that their staff members are adequately DEI trained, then we can see that contributing. As well as this improper supervision. When supervisors are allowing their own biases, are contributing to the system and contributing to harming their employees, uh, that can cause a lot of racism and that can really impact employees with feeling supported and feeling as though they belong in that place. Um, and then the points I left for last, lack of accountability and no amends for harm done, I feel those go together because when we have accountability, we also make amends. And so this is really important for moving on from the harm done. And so I think this really goes back to these restorative justice and transformative justice practices that we spoke about briefly earlier, is ensuring that the person harmed has a voice in what is rectified moving forward, how we can move forward, how they see this problem being solved with these systems. And so next, I want to talk about using the system. The system, as we know, is not designed for us, but we can use it it's designed to work for us and our experience. And so when I say the system, I mean specifically our HR systems, our leadership management systems, the system that we as individuals work in on a daily basis. And so I have some tips here that I have found successful with when combating workplace racism. And so the first tip I have for you all is to document everything. Send emails, send texts, send G Meets, send G messages, anything and everything documented. If you have a verbal conversation, send a follow-up email. Make sure that everything is documented. And even if you don't send a follow-up email, make a note of when that conversation happened. Um, and document these things on your own private computer. But if you're documenting on your own private computer, please be sure to not document any confidential information, because while we want to protect ourselves from workplace racism, we also want to be sure to not breach client confidentiality. But please document everything, because documentation is going to be the biggest thing that can help combat workplace racism when we are working within the system, meeting with HR representatives, meeting with civil rights advocates. Those are the things that they want to see. And then tip two is do not allow the stereotypes to fit. I know that this can sound kind of off putting, but um, if someone has assigned you the stereotype of an angry Black woman, then absolutely you deserve to get angry about that. You deserve to be mad. You deserve to feel whatever way you want to feel. Uh, but that may not benefit in the long run of working within this system. And so when we want to work within the system, uh, if we're combating that specific stereotype, staying calm and staying poised and staying in the moment can really help to combat that and dismantle this idea and this sort of character that someone else has represented you as. And next is report when you can and first. And so by this, I mean, if you are experiencing something, report it absolutely first when you can. If not that day, then the next day, inform everyone who needs to be informed, your supervisor's supervisor, HR, management, everyone. So that way they all know. Um, and I'll next show, it comes up here, there we go. This is my recommended template for documentation, showing the month, day, and year, and then a brief description of what you experienced. And then as well, if you have any evidence that shows that you experienced this, putting it under that specific bullet point. And so always going with a timeline format, I feel is best. It's very easy for people to read, especially for those who do not enjoy reading. Enjoy reading a timeline much better than paragraph and narrative format, and find it easier to put together a pattern, because when we're going to be reported within these systems, if we're going to be going to HR or a Department of Labor or a state department, showing a pattern that this has been happening to you. And so being sure to show that in a clear, concise format. Now, the last tip I will give is to ask for a racial justice advocate. Not all organizations readily have these, but if you ask for one, you may be able to implement this within your organization. And so a racial justice advocate is essentially an advocate for you to sit in your meetings, whether they be with HR, whether they be with your supervisor. And it is someone who, when they hear that there is something a little fishy going on, if they hear that you are getting overwhelmed, they hear that something is not going to be going in your favor, they can pause the meeting and then talk with you about it. So you have someone in real time to talk about these things with. Now, oftentimes, you will have to be sure and let HR know that you're comfortable meeting with this person in that presence with them. But having a racial justice advocate can help take that mental load off of you having to be present for these meetings, but also be present about your emotions and be present about how you're feeling in that moment. And a racial justice advocate can keep an eye on how you're feeling as well as understand what is truly going on in those meetings, if this meeting is really for your benefit, without having an emotionally attached perspective. And so just to close, I do have a visualization practice for us. This one is one of my favorites. it talks about us planting our intentional roots. And so I'd like to invite you all to just find a comfortable place to sit. If you want to stand, please do so, whatever feels comfortable for you. And then if you feel comfortable doing so, just lean your neck back. If you'd like to close your eyes, then feel free. But then just think about what roots you want to plant in this earth, what roots you want to leave behind. And imagine those roots growing out from your feet into the earth. And now these roots don't have to be ones that are staying here forever. They can go with you wherever you want to go. And think about where you want to go. Where do you want your future to take you? And now I like to add a little twist to this as well, where we're going to visualize our head full of flowers and leaves and branches. And where are our branches going to take us? Where do we want our future to go out to? Where do you want your pathway to go to? Um, and I am envisioning for all of you that this is a healthy pathway filled with brightness and healthy workplaces where you can thrive and be supported. Um, and so, whatever pathway and branch you would like, envision that for yourself and think about that as you plant your roots and you set your path for your future pathway. And so that is all that I have in my presentation for you all. I do have um, time for questions and comments, um, and as well as um, my contact info here. I do want to thank you all for sharing and listening. And thank you to Yujima for allowing the space for this conversation. I will also put my contact information in the chat so that way we can connect. I'm happy to connect with anyone and everyone. So please feel free to reach out if anyone would like to. But yes, I would love to hear some questions, comments, whatever anyone is feeling.
Thank you so much, Maya. Any folks have any questions? I see a comment saying, thank you so much for the space. It was very validating and I felt at ease.
Thank you. That's so wonderful to hear.
Ayana raised her hand. You should be able to unmute yourself.
Yeah. So thank you for this. This was a really great conversation. I always just appreciate the reminder that even people of color can exhibit racism or exhibit bias or, anti-Blackness in the workplace, even unknowingly, right? And so, like, we really have to do a deeper dive into how we're treating each other, how we're viewing each other, the ways in which we talk about each other, and the why behind it. So I just really appreciated this.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for your kind words. I appreciate that. And I love having the conversations like that.
Thanks, Ayana. Any other folks have any questions or comments?
Oh, this is comfort. I'm not sure what's happening with my video. I wanted to bring my face out, but I see our logo, so that's fine. Without taking so much space. Um, I think to what Ayana just shared, I've been grappling a lot with my own colonization, coming from a British space, and learning my own cultural self study and how internalized oppression has shown up within myself, among others. And really, it's really hard work to do. So I appreciate you, Ayana. I guess it's not a question, it's just a comment that colonization has taken up a lot of root in terms of sometimes even how we can be for instance, I'll say maybe anti-black or anti this without and most of this for me personally, they've been very mindless behaviors, I call them, because I'm so unaware. And then as I do the work, I'm realizing like, oh my gosh, there's so much work to decolonize. So thanks for sharing that. And I think it's something that we need to keep talking about in terms of internalized oppression, especially in the movement that we work in. Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I agree so much completely with you. Um, and I think one way that I found to combat that is um, keeping in mind and just being so much aware of and engrossing myself into Black spaces. I came from a very rural white background, and so engrossing myself with people who looked like me, so that way I could be more enveloped in my culture and people who just supported me for me. And that helped me combat that a lot. Um, and so, thank you.
Thank you, Comfort. I think Araba had a question if you wanted to come off mute.
Yeah, it's I guess it's more so of a comment. Maya, I just want to thank you for this presentation. I really appreciated I think overall in terms of like how to navigate systemic racism within the workplace, I really appreciated you advising that we document everything. I had like a situation when I worked for an organization prior where things were being said and I kind of felt like I was being gaslit. And there were different narratives that were going around and I wasn't really sure on how to um properly advocate for myself. And so someone else had recommended that I literally keep a track of emails after phone conversations, sending a follow-up, just like you said. And it was really helpful in turning around the situation for me. So I really do appreciate that advice. I think it's super practical. And I think it's also affirming for you as a person who is navigating systemic racism, just to make sure like you're not going crazy, right? Like you're experiencing oppression in real time. So thank you for that tip. And like if you have any resources to share to help us in this work continue to like navigate these systems, like that'd be great. So just wanted to throw that little nugget out there.
Yes, I have quite a bit of resources that I have saved up, and I'm happy to share them with anyone. Please feel free to connect with me if you're interested in those. Um, I have a little folder I keep of resources, so please feel free to reach out if you're interested in those. I do have a private question that was asked, like a direct message. And so it says, what to do when you don't relate to Black, white, or Hispanic people. I'm a Black Latina and I don't relate to anyone. And so um, I think this involves a lot of just personal identity viewing. Uh, I have, I mean, I am a biracial woman, and so I've taken a lot of time to just review what identity means to me, what my identity is, and where I align. Um, some books that helped me, well, I should say book, it's one that is very old, but I found it to be very helpful. It's called Half and Half, and it's just stories of biracial, bicultural individuals telling their experiences. And I think with myself, sometimes I identify as a biracial woman, sometimes I identify as a Black woman because that is just who I am. That is just my person of my being. And so finding where you align within your identity, it doesn't have to align with anyone else's identity. That's the advice I would give for that.
Thanks, Maya. I see Kaylin has a question if you want to come off mute.
I do. Thank you for this awesome presentation. I just had one thought about when you were talking about the stereotypes in the workplace, and you use the example of the angry Black woman trope stereotype that's often used. And I understand that you were you're trying to encourage everyone to, remain level-headed throughout, being challenged in that way. My concern is that I wouldn't want Black women to be paralyzed either by that, because I've definitely seen that, where you're afraid to speak up or defend yourself because you're afraid of being perceived that way. And so you are basically being abused in the workplace, because that's like the last thing you want to be looked at as an angry Black woman. But I just feel sometimes, you you angry, or even you might not be angry, but you just might be passionate or upset, or whatever it is at the time. And so I guess that's my concern, is that balance as we are Black women doing this work, and not being continued to be tethered by these stereotypes. So, thank you.
I think that, first off, I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think that really only applies to when you are reporting, because that is when we really have to work within the system that we are given, and we have to use that system and just work with what we're given. And so if someone is painting you as that trope, then making them see that you are not that. You are not that stereotype. That is not you. That is not your identity. That is not who you are. Even if you do get pissed off at everything, like that doesn't matter, because that trope is not you. You are your own person with your own being. And so I think that because you deserve to get angry at everything, no matter who you are. Like, I mean, I get pissed, I get angry. And so I think as Black women, we're seen in a different light. And when that light is shined by a institution like human resources, like a Department of Labor, like those really structural institutions, we just want to be mindful of directly combating a stereotype that we know has been put upon us. And so if that isn't something that is being assigned to you, um, then maybe you don't need to combat that. But that is what I would think about that. Yeah. Thank you for that question.
Oh, Miranda, you were muted, but I felt like you were telling me to go.
I was, thank you.
Okay, I was like, if not, I'm just gonna say it. So I'd put a comment in the chat earlier, but to both Kaylin and Maya's points, like it's a really fine line for how you balance like authentic expression, frustration, all that, and how sometimes people will just, even if you don't show up that way, like people will still assign it to you, right? And so sometimes it's like, well, yeah, let me be the angry Black girl today, but I'm still gonna have my list of notes that I've been taking from these interactions, or like I'm still gonna confront this thing that's happening, even though I'm not gonna give you the energy that you're expecting. A lot of conflict resolution and how people are taught to do conflict resolution, especially in nonprofit spaces, is oftentimes very anti-Black, but people don't recognize it as being anti-Black. And so you'll say, if you're called into a meeting and it's like, we need to resolve this conflict, we need to get on the better communication scale. It's often where they're placating to white tears instead of like the actual harm that was caused by that person, or like by the non-Black person in that workspace. So yeah, it's really hard to balance all this.
Yes, thank you for that. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ayana. Any other folks have any questions or comments? Okay. Well, Maya, I will return the floor to you, but I do want to ask if you have any hopes or wishes for the work, or if there's anything in specific you wanted to leave us with.
Oh, my hopes and wishes for the work. I would say that I hope that we can move forward in having serious commitment to anti-violence, anti-oppressive work, and that we see massive amounts of change and support for our people of color workers, and for the survivors we work with, um, and that we ensure that ourselves as employees, and not we, the staff, the leadership, the management, ensure that we are supported, that we are properly cared for, we have the support that we need, and that they are creating the space that is not conducive to harassment, violence, discrimination. That is what my hope is for the work. And I would love to see that within the next 10 years, but that I feel like is, an ideal that that would be within the next 10 years. But I hope for you all that within the next year, you're in a healthy workplace where you feel loved and supported.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you all. I appreciate the time, and I am so glad to have been here with you. Please feel free to connect with me. You can send me an email or LinkedIn message. And just thank you for allowing this conversation to happen. So I hope you all have a great day.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining. Have a good one.